Hello, and welcome to My Words, Our Journey, Season 6, Episode 5, A Church for Pete. If you recall, in the last episode, rumors started to spread about Pete and his streaking. Pete had way too many messages on his answering machine, and he also met Reverend Paul Samuel. As we finished, Pete was sitting in his favorite place, his back porch. Today, we join Pete on his journey with Chapter 16. Tuesday after school let out, Pete was standing out in front of the store, taking in the day, thankful for selling a couple books that he had recommended to an older couple taking some time in the mountains and wanted a good read, when Beth and Molly came strolling down the sidewalk. Beth was tall, thin, short dark hair, and a big smile. Molly, the exact opposite, short, a little heavy for her age, and long red hair that bounced in the breeze. They were both giggling and laughing when they noticed Pete watching them approach. They spent the next hour plus talking, Pete getting to know them, him. It was nice. Molly was a sweet girl with big dreams. Her book was based on a young girl that lived in Plum Rose and could communicate with animals, but only those local to the area. Pete promised he'd take it home with him. Molly had handwritten a note of thank you with her mother's cell phone underneath. Walking them out and thanking Molly for the 20th time for bringing him her special book to read, he could see Miss Lovejoy coming towards him from across the street. She held 2 tall cups and had a huge grin on her face. After a moment of small talk between Beth, Molly, and Phyllis, Pete and his friend re-entered the store. She had brought him what she described as the best smoothie in the county, and Pete was impressed. She told him it was a huge thank you for all the chaos he was stirring around town. They sat on the couch and talked. She explained how he was the talk of the town. Without saying it, he felt like he was probably the butt of several jokes, but unlike Miss Perney, Miss Lovejoy would never say that. Pete had ordered some new books for the store, and so he spent the better part of the afternoon making room and putting them out on the shelves. During this time, he liked to think of Cece. Was she part of the reason he didn't show any interest in someone like Beth? She had been attractive enough, was so sweet, had a lovely daughter. He could tell they both adored each other, and she seemed to be a great mom. No ring, but still, something held him back. Was it the woman from the previous week? Where did that come from, he thought. About an hour before closing, he decided to treat himself to a nice dinner before heading home. When the door locked, he tossed his backpack in the truck, cracked the window because it was kind of muggy out, and then he walked across the street and did some window shopping. His thought process was, as he walked, he'd come across something interesting that would catch his attention. And if not, he'd circle back to the deli. He loved the deli. Pete liked the small-town feel of his downtown. Everyone smiled, shared a greeting. There was no need to guess what they were saying about him behind his back. Nothing he could do about that. Besides, this was his home now, and in time, all that would be done and pass, wouldn't it? And he'd just be one of them. He hoped so, anyway. Before he was even close to the restaurant, he could smell the aroma. It was magnificent. He was drawn to the door. The sign said, Bountiful Harvest. A quick glance of the menu, and Pete was sold. The place was busy, like a 20-minute wait at 7 o'clock on a weeknight busy. That means it's good, he thought, and found a corner to stand in until he was called. Pete was not one that steered clear of eating alone. He had done a lot, actually. Now, he hated to go to the movies alone. That was a different story. Dining alone was fine with him. He preferred it, actually. No conversation, awkward mouths full of food, and all that went along with that. He was seated in the back, close to the kitchen, farthest from the restrooms. It was okay. He was used to being placed wherever. A single top is not their top priority. He got it. The menu was only 1 page. Very nice paper, colorful, various fonts. Someone had taken their time to create this. In the end, he ordered a cup of homemade vegetable soup, unsweet tea, and the grilled salmon special. The menu reflected the attention of detail in every aspect of the meal. Pete was not impressed much, but the service, quality of the food, almost made him forget he was in Plum Rose, Tennessee. His server was a kind man named Howard, and he had been great, like Thomas from the Smokehouse Grate. So Pete was a little surprised when he saw Howard coming towards the table with a dessert instead of a bill. Howard placed a decadent masterpiece in front of him and said, Compliments of management. They hope you enjoyed your dinner. Your bills have been taken care of, too. Consider it a welcome to town gift from us to you. And with that, he topped off the tea and was gone. Pete could not even think about finishing the dessert, so Howard packed it up for him. When Pete asked to thank the manager or owner, Howard explained they had just left, had to be back early for deliveries. Pete left full and curious. Everyone else seemed to either gossip, make fun of, or want something from him. Here he was treated to the best meal he had had in a long time. Instead of jacking up the prices, they wouldn't let him pay. Well, he'd always heard, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. And he thought that probably pertained in this instance, but had no clue exactly what it meant. Chapter 17. The following morning, Pete parked in his usual spot, but instead of entering the store, he crossed and walked down to Bountiful Harvest. He decided it wouldn't just be right if he didn't go thank someone for the amazing dinner he had the night before. As he approached, he could see the delivery truck pull out and head in the opposite direction. The couple of cases were sitting by the propped open front door, so he picked them up and entered the way that he had last night. It was dark now, quiet. He looked around but had no idea where to go until he remembered where he had sat the night before, by the kitchen. In the dark, he was working his way in that direction when he heard the short gasp in front of him. Sorry, my name's Pete. I have the bookstore down the street and just wanted to thank someone for the amazing dinner last night. A second later, a light came on and Pete was looking at the lovely lady from before. She looked just as he had remembered, other than the fact she seemed a little put off that he was standing there with two boxes that belonged to the restaurant, wandering around in the dark. Pete was taken back, and he knew there was an awkward pause. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. Again, wanted to thank you, and the boxes were just there, so I thought I'd bring them in. Hi, my name is Pete, and you are? Olivia. Well, Olivia, I believe I saw you at the bookstore with someone around my opening. Thank you so much. We didn't buy anything. Oh, slight laugh. Most folks don't, but I appreciate everyone at least giving me a shot. Well, again, let the appropriate folks know I really appreciate the meal. It was a nice surprise. Okay, thank you. Another pause lasted just a little bit too long. Well, I should probably get ready for the day. Probably already have a line for me out front on the sidewalk, you know. No laugh. Maybe a slight grin, Pete thought. As he left, he had wished he had never made the effort. Chapter 18. The rest of the morning, Pete was in a funk. He couldn't shake it. So, to try to break out of it, he did something that he had thought about before, but hadn't really decided to do until he did. He had purchased some bookshelving on wheels, so he took some of his favorite books, put them in boxes, took the shelving outside, followed by the boxes, and then the two nice computer-generated signs went on top. Pete's Best Reads. He also took some time, moved his beverage cart, and a couple of oversized chairs out as well. If they won't come to the books, take the books to them, or something like that. Pete was almost immediately thanked by some of the other store owners and managers. Before long, other businesses did something similar. Kind of like a block party, but not. It was a fun afternoon. A couple folks bought their wireless speakers out, turned on some country station. Others were handing out free samples. The word spread. Main Street had actually been closed off for a couple hours. Small town. No one complained. And the police were more than happy to oblige. The scene, the atmosphere, it is what Pete needed to get through the rest of the day. And if it was all that had happened, he would have been okay. But it wasn't. About an hour into the event, he noticed Olivia coming down the sidewalk, weaving in and out of traffic, carts and chairs. He watched as she smiled, waved, and spoke to folks as she moved with purpose. Finally, she was standing in front of Pete. So rumor has it this was your doing. Pete sighed. I'm sorry. Is this having a negative effect on you or the restaurant somehow? If so, it wasn't my intention. No, nothing like that, she said, as she fixed herself a flavored water. Today it was strawberry lavender infused. The internet said it was great. I've been asking for something like this for the past 2 years, and all I heard was, it won't work. People will come, then they'll leave. Crowds, parking, blah, blah, blah. And the new guy puts out flavored water and his favorite books. And we get this. Olivia spread her arms and circled. When she stopped, she was standing in front of Pete again. I'm sorry for earlier. I was startled. Had an appointment I was dreading. Not your fault. You just happened to be there. The pause wasn't awkward, but it was there. Pete didn't want to say the wrong thing. He liked the fact she'd walked over, and to be honest, he didn't want it to end. Do you like to read? I read a lot when I was younger, but now, with the restaurant and all, I just haven't. Yeah, life can get busy. Well, when you read, what do you like to read? You're going to laugh. No, I hear all kinds of answers, really. I won't laugh. Well, I really enjoyed the first couple of Harry Potter books, if I'm being honest. Okay, well, you and about a billion other people. You can't all be wrong. I've read each book at least once. Maybe the first and the last twice, if I'm being honest. I'm thinking about starting a book club. How do you think the folks around town would warm up to witches and spells? Then they laughed together. They spoke for another few minutes. Then she mentioned she should get back. Pete thanked her for stopping by. As she made her way across the street, he felt Miss Lovejoy standing right up close to him. She's a pretty thing, isn't she? Without looking away, Pete replied yes, then turned red-faced and smiled at Miss Lovejoy. Chapter 19. Miss Lovejoy had asked to come back by the shop when the going-ons were done, as she put it. She wanted to speak with him about something. The talk was enlightened on a couple levels. One, he now knew that Miss Lovejoy really had a kind heart and looked out for the folks of the town the best she could. And second, he knew more about the lovely Miss Olivia Cunningham than he probably should. She had been gone for a while. Pete had locked up once she had gone and had turned off the lights and sat there in his comfy chair, reflecting on the words she had spoken. Miss Lovejoy was not one to beat around the bush, so the talk quickly turned to Olivia, a brief history, and a more recent set of events that she felt he should know about before, as she put it, he became any more smitten. Olivia was the only child of Dr. William and Brenda Cunningham. She had had a normal childhood, was popular, well-liked, played sports, got good grades, volunteered when she could. She had gotten a scholarship to play soccer somewhere up north, but Miss Lovejoy couldn't really remember the college. While there, she had met someone special. They dated, fell in love, and moved in together near the college campus that they had graduated from. There she got a job teaching and coaching soccer, which paid the bills, while her feller attended law school. From what she could recall, he had graduated, had his first job offer when Olivia first started getting ill. The long and short of it, the love of her life, the man she thought she'd spend the rest of her life with, well, he decided he couldn't give his new career the time and attention it deserved and be there for her too. She tried to make it work on her own, but in the end, she moved home with her dad. From what Miss Lovejoy knew, Olivia had good days and bad days. But her and her father had bought the bountiful harvest when the previous owner retired. Everyone in town knew there was no way they could have afforded it. But Potter, Olivia's father, and Harvey something, Phyllis couldn't remember, had worked together at the electric company, so a rumor on the street was that they had worked out a deal so Olivia could take over the restaurant. Potter would be seen there from time to time, but it was all Olivia. That was the word on the street. She told all this to Pete because she knew many a man's heart had been broken trying to get close to Olivia, and she didn't want the same for him. She's a good girl, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of good girls that would like to get close to a guy like you. He thinks that's what she had said. Pete thought he understood the pain, grief, maybe even the type of anger that should be hidden deep, but he had not experienced the same as Olivia. On the way home, he passed by Bountiful Harvest. There were folks waiting outside to get in. After hearing what he had heard, he knew being too forward, pushy, wasn't going to do him any good, so he passed, made the loop on Baker's Ave behind the store, and headed home. Chapter 20. The following Friday night was the first home game of the season for the Bishop County Thundering Herd, an impressive name for a team Pete had heard had not been very good over the past decade or so. Game started at 7, so like many of the neighboring stores, a sign was hung out that said, "Gone footballing," a play on "gone fishing," he guessed. One of the young people from town had brought him the sign and told him everyone used them, so he donated $10 to the team and promptly placed the sign on the door at 6:30. He was more excited than he thought he would be. It had been a while since he had gone to a high school football game. By the time he arrived, the parking lot was nearly full. As he walked towards the modest field, he could see families, couples, groups of boys and girls laughing and talking. It was the first time he had truly felt alone, and like he was missing something. Still, he's going to have a good evening. So he shrugged it off, stopped, bought a hat to support the team at a table being run by Moms Against Drunk Driving, and followed the flow of folks towards the stands. He was impressed at the way the town had turned out to support the team, also a little overwhelmed. Surveying the bleachers, he was hard pressed to find an empty seat. But he did notice folks were walking past the bleachers. Then he looked ahead. He could see the grassy hill on the west end of the field. Perfect, he thought. The ground was dry. He had no problem sitting on the grass and watching a little football. After standing in line for some popcorn, a corn dog, and a tea, he made his way over to the hill. That was now filling up as well. The atmosphere was great, from the turnout to the singing of the national anthem. It wasn't until the football game started that things went just a little sideways. Pete wasn't accustomed to the way the adults and some of the young people were yelling profanities at the opposing team, players, coaches, and most certainly the refs. Some of it was coming from the hill, but it seemed right from kickoff it was chaos in the stands. He was so glad he hadn't sat over there. He would have had to have found a way to leave. Before he could eat half of his small popcorn, the score was 17-0 visitors. It was ugly. If they wanted to yell at anyone, it should be the coach for the home team. If he didn't know any better, he'd swear it was the first time they'd played football. By halftime, the score was 38-0, but it didn't appear that anyone was even considering leaving. Pete looked for an exit strategy, but he didn't see a way out without being noticed by someone that would certainly call him out for it. So he stayed. In a few minutes after that decision, someone sat down next to him. It was the old man that they called Potter. Pete tried to look around for Olivia. He was disappointed. As on cue, Potter said, "We had some out-of-towners come by the restaurant, and they overstayed their welcome as far as I'm concerned. But Olivia, she takes them all in like stray cats, lets them stay as long as they wish. She reminds me, they're why we're here." The second half was starting, still no Olivia. Potter didn't seem to have any plans to go anywhere. Pete learned very quickly that the old man was wholeheartedly believed in yelling at high school football games as well. The only difference for him, he didn't care which side you were on. When the game was over, well, let's be honest, it was over 10 minutes into the game, but when it was officially over, the score was 73-0, and the backups played the entire second half for the opponents. Still, fans were laughing, chatting, acting like they had won the game when it was over and heading to their vehicles. When they arrived at the parking lot, Pete said goodbye to his new friend, well, hill-setting buddy, and turned to find his truck. He hadn't taken too many steps when he looked back. While more and more people were filing in and flooding out, Potter hadn't moved. So he walked back over. "Have you forgotten where you parked, old friend?" Pete asked. Potter seemed startled by the question for a moment. "Oh, no. My daughter's picking me up. She must be running a little late. Had to close the restaurant and all." After some discussion, Potter agreed to wait in the truck with Pete. The temperature had dropped since the sun went down. Pete didn't feel right leaving him alone standing out there. After all, they had spent half of a football game bonding. Pete listening to the guy fuss about anything that had remotely anything to do with football. To his credit, though, Pete noticed, he never did use any cuss words. When it was all said and done, the parking lot was empty, all but Pete's truck. Even the traveling buses had left. Pete offered to take Potter home, but he didn't have a cell phone. And if he left, he knew his daughter would show up and be worried. So they waited. So I think we'll end there and leave Potter and Pete sitting in the empty parking lot. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. Hope you're enjoying the story so far. And as always, thank you for listening and have a great day.